However, before we can really get into Columbus, we really need to look at before the so-called discovery. And in fact, before I go to the next slide, I want to talk about this word discovery. 1492, Columbus sails the ocean blue and so-called discovered the Americas. There's obviously some problems with this term, as in discovers means that you found it first, and obviously Columbus didn't find it first because there were already Native Americans living in the Americas. So generally speaking, if you talk about the discovery, put it in quotation marks, because it's when the Americas becomes connected to the wider world much more, but technically discovery is really not the quite correct term. And the thing is, if we're looking at before Columbus and everything like that, this class, unfortunately, it covers a lot of ground, and I can't go into details about everything. And so one of the things that I have definitely skimmed on a bit, and I would recommend reading your book to cover this a little better, would be Native Americans before European contact. I'd also recommend looking into other courses pertaining to Native Americans if you are interested in this. So I am going to be really generalizing here. You can even say that's the second bullet point here, that I'm going to generalize a lot and kind of give you the really broad facts. Know that there are exceptions to a lot of these rules. So the thing is, we're going to see in about 40,000 to about 8,000 BC, we have the Bering Strait, or basically a land bridge that connected Asia to North America. And this is how people first migrated into the Americas. The thing is, when we talk about migrations, it's not just like one group migrated to the Americas and those are the Native Americans. You have to imagine this migration really came in waves of different groups over time. However, then climate is going to warm around the earth, and this basically isolates these people from Europe and Asia. Now, generally speaking, these societies early on are going to be hunter-gatherer. Things are going to change. We're going to see things like the extinction of large land mammals of North America. This would be like the mammoths and the mastodons. Most likely they went extinct because of overhunting, so that whole changing the makeup of the animal kingdom and everything, not really a new issue. Also, on top of that, the warming that I talked about previously is going to lead to farming societies in about 3000 BC. Once again, keep in mind, I'm generalizing on a lot of these aspects. I'm not going into all the details, so there are exceptions to this. However, when we get farming and the farming revolution or the farming climacteric, depending on who you define for, and if you really are interested in that, I would recommend definitely taking a World Civ class. The thing is, with farming, societies have a much more dependable food source. And with a more dependable food source, this means that you can have larger populations in your society. The thing is, with larger populations, a very dependable food source, you're going to stay put where you're farming your food. And so this leads to things like permanent villages, whereas a lot of the initial hunter-gatherer were constantly moving around. Not just permanent villages, but also larger villages, or even I could say cities at that point. But with all of this permanence, this also means that territory needs to be defended at this point, because now you're defending your crops and your people from others who might covet it. The other thing about this is women generally in these societies, when we're looking at gender roles, women would be ones who might gather plants and everything like that, but they were a lot of times the ones who were preparing plants and doing the farming as well as caring for the children, whereas men still hunted. So a lot of times it was hunting and farming combined in these societies. And so the thing is, when we look at these women being farmers, they actually had generally a better status in the Americas because their job was so important to society. Now, once again, I could talk about specifics, but I'm not going to be able to because that would take a whole nother, 3 hours of your life and everything like that. But basically you get these, different large tribes, anywhere from, the Olmecs to the Mayans to the Aztecs. But what's really, really important here, and I want you to make note of, is that these societies were very complex and large long before the Europeans ever came to the Americas. We see with these different societies in different areas, the rise and fall of entire empires, large cities over time that had flourished but then dwindled or even disappeared. Periods of warfare that might break out and affect, thousands of natives. Now, that being said, the Europeans' arrival, or so-called discovery, does happen to coincide with some particular instabilities within Native American groups. We're going to see some overextension of certain groups like the Aztecs, Incas, things like that, who very much survived by dominating other native peoples. And then on top of that, in North America, we're going to have seen the collapse of the centralized society at Cahokia that you can see marked here on this map, and Chaco Canyon. What we do know about this society is, so keep in mind, 1492 is when Columbus, so-called, discovers America. We know that this society of Cahokia lost population starting at about 1200, and by 1400 it's almost completely disappeared. Today there's just like the mounds left, and there's all kinds of articles that I would recommend looking up if you're really curious about it. They fascinatingly enough do a lot of archaeological finds here using poop sediments for sediment to figure out like population and everything at different times. So we have this particular instability in North America because now all these different Native American groups are kind of fighting for dominance before Europeans have even arrived. Which actually, speaking about that, I should mention, before 1492, if we're looking at the population of the Americas, the population of North and South America combined is about 70 million people, whereas the population of Europe at this time is also about 70 million people. Now, obviously, that's a lot more land per person, but you can see that's a large population. Which, on that note, we got to look at Europe. The thing is, when Europe's look to the west, so look at Europe here on your map, and when they look to our left or their west, all they saw there was ocean, and then on the other side of that huge ocean is like China and Asia. The Americas didn't exist in their mind. It was just one large ocean. The thing is, they were very aware of what would be on the other side of that ocean, of Asia, and even more important to them, all of the potential wealth that is going to be held there. The thing is, trade with the East was extremely expensive. There's all kinds of economic trade issues. So let's look at this. If you're living, let's say like in France or England, and you decide to cross, land over into the Russian Empire, Siberia, and everything like that to get to Asia, the thing is, the Turks block most of these land routes to Asia. Okay, so that doesn't work. Okay, let's go just a little bit further south then, not necessarily all the way to Africa, but you can see that Mediterranean Sea there instead. The thing is, the Mediterranean was basically controlled by the Italian city-states. Great if you're Italy, not so great if you're anyone else in Europe. So rather than traveling out east, a lot of trade instead would go through, countless middlemen. The problem with that is every middleman who gets this item, the price goes just a bit higher because, they have to make money off of these items. So it becomes very expensive. And on top of that, many of these middlemen were Muslims. And so, unfortunately, Christian Europe at this time, the more things change, the more things stay the same, were not happy with the idea of Muslim merchants making money off of this trade. So basically, long story short, Europe is going to seek alternative routes such as sea routes. A big one was, let's see about going around Africa to get to Asia. The thing is, these kinds of sea routes are only going to be possible because of many nations coming together and having their more reliable navigational tools, come together basically. And so this would be things like, we get the magnetic compass from China, we get the astrolabe from Muslims in Spain, we get different types of sails from like Northern Europe, things like that. Now, that being said, going around the tip of Africa is extremely difficult. You can see there, that's the Cape of Good Hope. These waters can be really, really precarious, and then trying to get it with the wind and the sails and everything, you can see how like Vasco da Gama comes down and kind of shoots out, because it's very difficult to get around the tip of Africa. We're going to see that Europeans, they don't even get to the tip of Africa until 1488. So keep in mind, 1492 is Columbus discovering, in quotes, the Americas. And in fact, it's not until 1497, so after Columbus, that we see Europeans go all the way to India via the ocean around like the Cape of Good Hope. So it is quite a while. However, this is setting up something slightly different. Basically, as Europeans go down the coast of Africa and start sailing south and everything, they are going to start taking over islands on the way there. And a lot of these islands are going to become sugar plantations. And on top of that, a lot of times the Europeans would enslave Native American inhabitants. And as they reduce their numbers, mostly due to disease and exhaustion, they're going to start importing more and more African slaves. So we're seeing a lot of these systems that are going to have huge impacts on the Americas already being set up at this time. We also have a journal question here. This is the first question here. Before the Europeans arrived, Native peoples in the Americas were a blank population spread across vast areas of the Americas and were made up of blank. So I want you to go answer this question, see if you can get it right.